Okay, so this week the Sikha, we took a little bit of one Sikha in Chelek Beis, look at the Sikhas on Parshas Matos, and we took another Sikha that's in the, it's in Parshas Chelek Daled, I think. The other one is on Parshas on Masei and Chelek Beis, I believe. And so it's because the Parshas on Chabaris, the Parshas are joined, we'll have a little bit about each Parsha. So in the beginning of Parshas Matos, it talks about the mitzvah of, should have four sides of Matos and one of Masei. You have,
No?
57, 59. Oh, okay. So, yeah, you figured it out? My fault. So in the beginning of our parsha, we talk about the halachas of nedarim. That it says that if a person makes a vow and says, I will do something or I won't do something, he needs to keep the vow. And there are certain situations where a person's vow can be released. If it's a young girl, then her father can release it. If it's a married woman, then her husband can release and nullify the vow. If it's neither of the cases, a person can go to a Chochom or to a Bezdin, and the Bezdin or the Chochom can release the vows. So we're going to speak about the general idea of vows according to Chassidus, that the idea of vows is there to separate oneself, to protect oneself from doing something that will immerse the person too much in the world, that will cause the person to be too much engaged in this world, and therefore forget about their purpose and their connection with Hashem. Inyan hanedarim hu, the idea of vows is v'kedivra HaMishnah nedarim siag leprishus. In Pirkei Avos it says that the vows are a fence around being separated and removed. In other words, that through vows it protects us. It keeps us like any other fence. A fence is made to protect something from something you don't want to enter in. The same thing, the vows protect us from not being overly absorbed in the physical and so on. A person makes a vow, and therefore by a vow, it's not meant for things that are prohibited. I don't make a vow that I'm not going to eat something that's not kosher. The vow is only about things that are normally permitted to me, and I'm making a vow, I'm making a neder, I will not drink this wine, I will not eat this meat, I will not indulge in things that are permitted to me. In general, this falls into the category of the Ramban explains and others explain that when it says in the Torah, Kedoshim Tiyu, you shall be holy, what does it mean you shall be holy? There's already many specific mitzvahs in the Torah tells you what to do. Why does it say Kedoshim Tiyu or Viskadishtem V'yisum Kedoshim? So from this we learn another mitzvah in the Torah. In addition to all the things that we need to not do or do because it's explicitly written in the Torah, this is connected with what you were saying, there's also an idea of sanctifying yourself, making yourself holy, even in things that are permitted. In other words, just because it's kosher, just because it has a hechsher on it, just because the Torah didn't say it's prohibited, doesn't mean that we have to be hedonistic, doesn't mean that we have to indulge in everything that's there. The Ramban goes at great length and says a person could be a novel b'rshus HaTorah, he could be a disgusting, very gross, very coarse person because he's following what says in the Torah. It doesn't say in the Torah that I can't eat 15 meals a day. It doesn't say in the Torah that I can't eat steak by every meal. It doesn't say in the Torah that I shouldn't go to every single restaurant in my neighborhood. It doesn't say that. As long as it's a kosher restaurant, I can go there. So we say, Kaddish Aschol b'mutalach, we have a responsibility, an obligation that even in things that are permitted, we have to sanctify ourselves. That is the concept behind making a vow. So, doesn't mean necessarily vows should be generally be avoided. That's what's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. And we try whenever we say something, we say bli neder. But the concept is there. The concept is always there that a person should say, do I really need to indulge in this? Should I be involved in this or not? It's like the concept of iskafia. It's the idea of iskafia. Not like, it is the idea of iskafia. So the Rebbe said, in Tanya it says that a person needs to bend himself. In the word koifes atzmai, he shouldn't make fiyad datit on someone else, he should make it on himself. He should force himself to not do everything that he wants to do. Not everything that you see in front of you do you have to partake from, even if you're not on the diet, even if you're thin as a rail. So now the Rebbe brings down, but we see a very famous Maimer Chazal that says otherwise. When it comes to vows, the Yerushalmi says explicitly, isn't it enough what Torah prohibited to you? What do you need to go ahead and add? The Torah said this is kosher, this is not kosher. Why do you need to be more religious than God? Why do you need to do something more than Him? So the Rebbe says, and the Rebbe elaborates upon this in many places, that in some places we see that vows are a good thing, holding back from permitted things and kosher things are a good thing. Other places we find, no, that a person needs to engage and use everything. So it depends who we're talking about. If a person's on the straight and narrow, he doesn't go off somewhere. If he's really keeping up to everything and he's really a spiritual person, he shouldn't hold himself back from the physical things. Adrab, it's prohibited for him to disengage from this world. It's obligatory upon us. If I am really a spiritual person, then I need to engage with this world. The more I engage with this world, the more I elevate it. But what happens if I'm not a spiritual person? If a person is not spiritual, so then it's the other way around. Instead of my engagement with the world elevating the world, it can drag me down. And that's why you could see one person, you could say, yes, you can indulge in whatever you want, and another person we say, no, you need to hold back. It says, Aval kasher misnagim boifen shal v'heim bikshu cheshboinus rabim chipus achar kol cheshboinus v'aytstatkis ketzad liyashakor ba'olam. A person's looking for ways to involve himself in the world more and more. Ein hu merkavel alakus. He's not a vehicle for godliness. In other words, he's not a spiritual being. Yesh loy tainuk b'dvarim gashmim. His delight is from the physical. Harei oz loy rak shlo yalas adavar gashmim ha'idei shishtamish boy. Ela adraba hatayve v'atainuk sheyesh lo b'dvar meichel v'chadoyma toirid oisay v'tifol gam yerida b'meichel. This is a classic thing that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that a person that's not fully spiritually developed, if a person engages with the physical because of their desire that they have, because of their enjoyment, so the person himself is drawn down by the physical, even if it's kosher, like we said before. And even the item that he's using is being pulled down into clip. This is totally up your alley, what we were talking about before. The Rebbe says, this reflects another thing that we see. Throughout the generations, more and more fences, more and more decrees, more and more takanas, the Chazal established. How come? If in the times of the Torah we didn't need to have the dinim of muktzah, for example, or other types of halachas, why all of a sudden, the later we get from Matan Torah, the later we come from the time of the Beis HaMikdash, then we add this fence, then we add this decree, then we add this takana. Because of the spiritual state. When we're in a higher spiritual state, we have more spiritual awareness, we don't need all of these fences that the Chachamim made. When we're in a lower state, as it is, because of the darkness of Golus, because of the distance that we are from Matan Torah, then it's problematic. Be'ikr, bizman bayis sheni. Primarily, many takanas and gzeiros that we know that Chachamim said, you shouldn't do such and such, primarily these were things that were established in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. In the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, Chochom didn't establish this. I'll just give you one example of something that's always brought down in Chassidus, is about Yom Tov Sharash and Shachais b'Shabbos. They don't blow shofar. The Chachamim said that you don't blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah coincides with Shabbos, because you're concerned that if a person doesn't know how to blow shofar, he's going to take the shofar outside, he's going to carry it outside during Shabbos, and he's going to violate Shabbos, even though it's going to mean that he's going to miss the mitzvah of blowing shofar. But this was only a gzeira, the decree that was established in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. In the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, the Jewish people were in a higher, elevated, holier state, and we didn't have to be concerned that a person might become so forgetful they'll forget and carry something out on Shabbos.
They get stoned.
What?
They were at that point in time, they were still like stoning. No, if you broke the Shabbos. Or it's communicating. What are they doing?
No, the point, even in times of the second Beis Hamikdash, they could do that.
Right. So
but this decree was made in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash.
Yeah.
So even at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, it had nothing to do with the punishments. It had to do with the spiritual level that the people were at. Bisman Bayis Rishon Heir Elokus Begilui, there was more godliness and revelation in a revealed state. Gam b'shivim shana shel achra churban harishon, in the 70 years of exile of Bavel, Adayin Noisar b'midah Mesayemes Roishim Gila Elokus Shoyv Bayis Rishon, something of it was felt still during Golus Bavel. Aval Bayis Sheni Shoy Chaser Begilui Oira Kedusha, Mishum Kach Gavar Choshech Hala Umazeh, Tiknu as Gedarim v'Siyagim Kedei Sheyuchlu Li'Smoided B'Choshech Hagadol Shal Umazeh. That's why we have all these different decrees and establishments and concerns that the Chacham established in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, which weren't necessary in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. By the way, the Rebbe says in a similar vein, Chassidus. People say, if Chassidus is so important to study, why didn't we have it 500 years ago? Why didn't we have it 1,000 years ago? Because Chassidus is actually coming to deal and to help us overcome the darkness of Golus. In the times when it wasn't so dark, in the time when we were more spiritually aware, we didn't need that so much. It's not just in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, but generation after generation, kechol shagavar achoshech, kach esifu yoser v'yoser chumres gedarim v'siyagim. Yes, to put on tzitzis even when we're not obligated, and to put on a yarmulke, kippah, even when we're not obligated to wear it, because we need that extra energy to be able to deal with the world. By every individual, there is different spiritual states that they're in. There could be a situation where a person's so in his own spiritual life that when he looks at the world around him, he doesn't see something oilam from the word helam, concealment. He sees Hashem's hands working through the world. He's at a level where he looks up and he says, see, look who created this. That's in a person's own life. Va'az Allah l'kvoya gedarim v'siyagim lifresh l'imana meribu dvarim gashmim afil dvarim amatarim mishum shem alulim la'atoisei l'adidai. So therefore, it's important in these times, in these situations, person has to know themselves and see, am I in a situation where I feel disconnected, I feel less spiritual? So then I need to put in more protections into place. Again, this connects with the famous Sikha of the Rebbe that he says, Kisivna bayis chadash vasisa ma'kel agagecha. When a person builds a new home, means he's going out into marriage. Usually when a person gets married, that's when they're entering into the world. Beforehand, they are secluded in yeshiva. They go out to get married, they're entering into the world, so then they need to make a micah, they need to make a fence around the roof. You need to make protections in place that you wouldn't have had beforehand. And then he goes on in Bays, Gam b'zman sha'choishav goiver b'shnei dvarim. The benefit we have is really a twofold benefit. When it's dark outside and we make these special protections, it expresses itself in two ways. Aleph, idea precious vachumris misrache ka'odom imagam miyusar m'choishach ha'olam moinim ba'ad ha'soyne ve'noisten lo yasaf sharas sheyuchol li'ilachem b'kedusha. Through all these different stringencies, so now what we're doing is we're making, like, I like to call it in a war, like a no man's land. There's areas when they make peace or they make a ceasefire, they'll make an area that nobody can go over there. What's the point? If you have a distance between two fighting forces, there's less likelihood that one will invade the territory of another. So if a person makes a greater distance between themselves and the physical realm, so then we give less opportunity for the klippa, for the negative forces to try to invade, to try to attack Kedusha. When we were Bachram, I remember we were speaking about Fabrengen, about the idea that everything that Rebbe speaks about by Fabrengen, we need to take a lesson in our own avodah. And the Rebbe was, one of the themes that the Rebbe many times spoke about was not returning territories to the Arabs. And the Rebbe explained that by giving them even a little, so then you give them a finger, they want a hand, you give them a hand, they want a foot, you give them a foot, they want the whole body. And like we hear them chanting now from the river to the sea. You know, whatever we give them, they want more. There's no end. So you remember we were Fabrengen, what does this mean for me? I'm not an Israeli politician. I have no influence, not on Israeli politics, not on American politics. Why do I need to hear this? So we were talking about the idea that by us there's also a war. There's the Goya Shebekirbacha, there's the Yetzer Hara that wants to invade the space of Kedusha. Sometimes we can think, you know, I need to battle the Yetzer Hara on so many fronts. Let me give him in. Let's give in something. Let's give back some territory to the Yetzer Hara. Let the Yetzer Hara have his fun with one thing. So the Rebbe was teaching us, this is what we as Bachim took from this, that the Yetzer Hara doesn't work that way. You tell the Yetzer Hara, you know what, I'll let you have this. I'll give in with this. It doesn't work that way. The Yetzer Hara is like the Arabs. You give them a finger, they want a hand. You give them a hand, they want the whole foot. You give them the foot, they want the whole body. There's no end. So by having this idea of precious, even from things that's permitted, so then we make like this boundary that becomes impenetrable. Base, another concept that happens through these fences, precious v'chumres, mamshichim oida l'kin naila yoser, we bring down a much higher level of godliness by dekach nasasais gabus mitzada kedusha. This empowers and gives more energy to the world of Kedusha than what the Kedusha would have had ordinarily. That this idea of a person's separation and removing themselves from the physical realm, that enables, and that is like an extra boost of armaments to be able to fight against the cliff. Kein gambin an der Dorim movad mal saprishis shbekach nishmarim ubamid misiems loyalist is all dar der in yon magashmim yes yistroy noysav shayde an neder nimshachas kedusha the atzma nesenes la adam tesefes koyach le avik bel umazeh. The Dorim makes an addition and increases a level of kedusha. It has a very holy energy to it. And just like a neder, when a person makes a vow, imparts upon the person very strong spiritual energy, the same thing, the person that holds himself back from the physical, kadosh atzma muterlach, even things that are permitted, draws down great spiritual energy. This itself, this extra energy, empowers the person to be able to overcome or to deal with the challenges that Klippa puts forth. So in other words, you can maybe put it a different way. The best type of battle in a war is the person that determines the place and time of the battle. If you leave it up to the enemy to determine when and how to attack, then you're in big trouble. You could say that was the difference between the 1967 war and the Yom Kippur War. In 1967, we said, we're going to bring the war to them. We're not going to wait for them to determine how and where we're going to fight. We're going to initiate. In Yom Kippur, for whatever reason, politics, whatever, they decided, we don't want to look like the aggressor, and we know how terrible the results were because of that.
They're doing it again now?
Yeah. So the point is the same thing with Clipper. We could wait for the Yetzer Hara to attack us and sneak up on us and have a battle with us with things that we're not expecting, and all of a sudden we get overwhelmed. Or we could bring the fight to them, and we could say, you know what? You want this kosher piece of cake? I will not eat it, not because I'm on a diet, but I will not eat it because it's not going to bring anything to my holiness. It's even more so, it's going to detract from my holy state. Top of the second column, Gimel, on page 58. We said earlier that when is there a necessity for vows and the concept of Kaddish Atzchom Mutterloch? When a person is in a dark, low spiritual state. We said that there's different people that can release them from vows. A Chochom, a Bezdin, a father, a husband. So why can they release? Because we are talking about someone that's in a higher spiritual level can empower us to overcome these type of things. The Rebbe says that the Chacham, whoever it is that's on a higher level, not only does not have to be worried that they are susceptible to becoming influenced and coarsened by the world, but they have the power to assist even someone that is liable to be coarsened by the world to schlep him out. The Rebbe in other places explains that's why it says that had to be Vaydaber Moshe, Rashi Amatis. We learned this out because only the heads of tribes, the Chachamim, had this capability to strengthen us and overcome and help us by us being connected to the leader, by us being connected to the tzaddik. He can enable us that even when we're engaged in the world, we shouldn't become impacted by it. Like I mentioned before, these are all individuals that are on a higher level. The father is the one that releases his daughter's vow. Because all what a young girl makes goes to her father. That shows that the father is on an elevated level than his daughter. A husband can do it for his wife. A woman has her husband's control over her. For sure, a sage that releases a person from their vow. There's some opinions that hold it's not just any Chochom, but it has to be someone that can trace back his smicha going back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, that this Chochom got his smicha from a Chochom before him, that the Chochom before him got from before him, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Only such a type of Chochom can release a vow on his own without recourse to a bezdin. This shows on what type of elevated level he's completely elevated. The Gimel Hadyotis, or another option is you have three ordinary people, not a Chochom. They have a bezdin, so because they are a bezdin, they have the power to be able to assist a person to engage in this world in such a type of way, they will not be affected by the world. Now he's going to bring this in concepts that have to do a little bit with Chassidus as well, the concept of Chochma and Bina. Before we read this inside, I'll just say outside the concept that he's talking here about Chochma and Bina. Chochma, in the way Chassidus explains, is the word Koyach Ma. It is an energy that has bittul, that imparts bittul, that brings about a person's state of being sublimated to Hashem. That was a very high spiritual state. Bina, on the other hand, it says, is the level of a mother that gives birth to the emotions, meaning it already relates to the world. So Chochma is something that's removed from this world, and therefore Chochma and Chochom can be matter to nether. Bina is the level of Nedarim. According to Kabbalah, Neder is in the level of Bina. And therefore, that's where Nedarim come from. And this idea that Rebbe is going to bring down in a practical sense, again, the same idea. When a person is removed from this world, he doesn't need the vows, he doesn't need the protections. But when they're engaged in this world, they need the vows, they need the protections. Bottom of 58, Dalet. Kol inyonei HaTorah boim b'derech klal u'b'derech prat. Kach hu gam inyan nedarim v'afarosam v'atarosam. Top of 59. B'derech klal noider ha-neder u'mi she'meifiroi u'matiroi so'yem shnei anoshim nifradim. As we said before, there's the Chochom and there's the person. There's the father and there's the daughter, etc. Ilu b'derech prat kayomim b'chol odom atzmoi shnei sugei ha'avoida yesh darga b'neshama shebebchinasa tzarech sheyiyeh neder u'metzuya darga voyam menu shebebchinasa tzricha li'is hafaras v'atzaras nedor. In every person themselves, there are two levels. When a person is operating on one level, so then they need to have the vow, they need to have the separation from this world. When a person is operating on the higher level, then they don't need it. And that's the two levels that we mentioned before, Chochma Bina, as he's soon going to explain. Nemer b'Torah HaKabbalah, move over in his bar b'Torah HaChassidus, kishtei dargas elu b'neshama, hein Bina v'Chochma. Metzad Bina tzarech lias nedarim. That is the source in the person's soul of the level of a neder is in Bina. Metzad Chochma, Chochom is akiras ha-neder. He is akiras ha-neder. The Chochom could completely uproot the neder. That's the level of Chochma. Ha-hevdel shebein Bina l'Chochma, hu Bina hi seichel, v'Chochma hi bittul. I brought in about midas, but even before that, Bina is using our own logic and our own senses. But when we rely on our logic and we rely on our senses and on our mind, it can lead us astray. We cannot only be boxed in by our own intellect. That's the problem with a lot of things, that we need to understand as much as possible. But there are times when I need to sublimate my mind to something greater. Seichel humadut umugbul. Yesh gvul mesuyim la'asagas ha'seichel she'me'ever loizeh ein asagas ha'seichel mesugel slagia. There's a boundary how far intellect can reach. Beyond that, intellect can't comprehend. Ukishboim linyonim shegam she'em l'mayel ma'seichel harei ein l'cha reshus lahar achra she'kein me'acher she'inyonim elu hem l'mayel ma'seichel ol la'seichel litois ol l'kabel oisom she'lo yiviyah emes al derech ma'shekosem l'chom hem l'lamara. When you're dealing with intellect and you're completely immersed in a level of intellect, and intellect, there's only so far how much you can understand. So if I am completely directed by intellect, so then I need to put a stop. I need to say, I can't indulge in everything, because if not, my intellect will lead me astray. And it will say, there's all types of justifications and all types of ideas, and then I start widening the envelope. Maybe this is not so bad. Maybe I can cross the line over here, etc., etc. That's when we're in the level of bina. That's when we're in the level of intellect. Avon mebchinas chochma ein chashash adam mikosher. Sheken k'teitzah min habitl shebechochma ein metzias la'atzmai kedugmas is batlos betfil shmeina esrem. Like a servant before his master. כעבד לפני אדוני, שאין חש כלל במציאוסי העצמיס, כל מציאוסי היא מציאוס אדוני. Like we know, the halach is, מה שקונה עבד קונה רבי. When a servant acquires something, it's automatically something that's acquired by his master. So when a person experiences the bittul of Chochmah, they do not experience themselves as something separate from Hashem. So therefore we're not worried that if he indulges in the physical, it will somehow lead him astray. Because he's always connected to the source. He always is sublimated to Hashem. He won't go off track like if he's completely just devoted to his own intellect. You say to Mizu, Habitul shebachachma noisen legam koyach basagosei, shegam hasagosei tia karoi. The bittul of Chochmah could direct and could control the intellect of Bina and make sure that the Bina, the intellect, should not go too far afield. The Chochmah will put a stop to it. Yeah, that far, but don't go further. That much is justified, don't go any further than that. That's just like the Chochom that influences the person that's not the Chochom. Could release the person that is taking the vow and could tell them, on my dime, you could do it. I will keep it in control. So it says, Ka'amar le'il shebekoyach ha'chochom lahatir an neder gam lezeh shemitzad atzmai yizakul l'neder. Mitzad ha'bitl shebechochma avol baal hu noisen koyach gam bebina naira ve'isha. The Chochom is able to empower us as well when we're connected to the Chochom. So now, the Rebbe is going to explain some more about the necessity of the separation that we spoke about. Beforehand, we spoke about that it's like this no man's land, that we make the separation so that two combatants shouldn't be able to attack each other. So we don't want to have the Yetzer Hara to be able to attack us in things that are prohibited. So we make a fence, we make a no man's land, we make a separation, and make sure that even things that are permitted, we stay away from. There's another advantage also of precious, of being separated and not indulging in even permitted things. Precious shem nedarim ein rak mishum shehadvarim hamatarim bahem hu shakua alun laviyai likash b'dvarim asurim. If a person is completely immersed in permitted things, it will eventually influence him and drag him into prohibited things. But rather ki'im mishum she'etzem meishtakos binyane heter ein retzuya. Ka'idea esek binyane ha'olam nasa etzle ha'olam l'metzias ha'tefeses mokim heipach ha'hergish she'einoin movada. When a person is immersed, even in kosher things, even in permitted things in this world, so then what happens is that instead of being in the mind space of realizing that there's nothing outside of Hashem, they start looking, this is enjoyable, this is pleasurable, this is something that's worthwhile to pursue. It's not all, his entire experience is not God-centered. Mizem, moving from this understood, Shagam Maus HaChochom Shebekoyach Levat LaNeder, Eine Rak Bekoyach, Sha'abitel Shebechochom Ashpia Alav Shedvar Yisrael Yeh Mufrach Etzloi.
Page 60.
Eine Rak Bekach, Sha'abitel Shebechochom Ashpia Alav Shedvar Yisrael Yeh Mufrach Etzloi, Elagam Shebedover Agashmi Atzmei Boy Oiseg Adam Yurgish Helikus Sheboy. The power of Chochmah is, and the same thing, the power of the tzaddik, the power of the Chochom is, to influence me that even while I'm engaging in this world, I don't become lost and absorbed in the physicality and the materialism of this world. Even while I'm engaged in this world, I am still sensitive to the godliness in this world. The Rebbe says this is the true meaning of B'chol Drachecha Da'eyu. It's a deeper thing than Kol Masechel L'Shem Shemayim. B'chol Drachecha Da'eyu means whatever you're doing, you know Hashem in that thing. You feel Hashem's presence. You are aware of Hashem's involvement with that thing. So when a person has that awareness, so then he doesn't have to be worried of becoming so totally immersed in the world that the world all of a sudden becomes a separate existence. No, everything he's doing, every move that he makes, thanks to the influence of his Chochmah, whether his own personal Chochmah or his connection with a tzaddik, helps him to be conscious and aware of Hashem that's in everything that he does, and therefore he's not going to make the world something separate from Hashem. It will still be by him a God-centric life. So he says, Dubar kvar ala hevdel shbei Chochmo bina. Here he's going to talk about the idea of midos and versus seichel shem bedugmas avaim. Chochma bina, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Chochma is likened to the father, and bina is likened to the mother, because both of them are involved in giving birth to the children of the soul. What's the children of the soul? The emotions. So my intellect both contribute to creating my emotions. But there's a difference in Chochma and bina, a difference in the father and the mother. Bina he ema midas, bina is the mother of the midas. He mahava mekor midas, it actually becomes the source for the emotions. Which means, in the spiritual big picture of things, it's shoyresh hanivroim, the root of all creations. Because since bina is responsible for the world, so the world has value and can think itself something important in and of itself. Just like a father doesn't have direct connection with birthing the child, it's the mother that has the greater connection with giving birth to the child. The father is more removed. He donated his energy 9 months earlier, so he's at a greater remove. The same thing, Chochma spiritually is more removed from the creations. And how much more so than the worlds that were created via Hashem's midas. As we know, the 7 midas, every midas is responsible for the creation of the world. Every midas is a different day of creation, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. That's the perspective of Chochma, that there's only God. Even though we see a world, we know that this is really essentially only Hashem himself. From the perspective of Bina, a person needs to be careful. They need to make this boundary. They need to make this no man's land. They need to make a removal from this world. So since the world has no importance and value, for example, sometimes you'll have kids are fighting over a certain toy or a certain game. So a parent might make a rule, that's it. You guys can't play with this toy, you guys can't play with this game. Why, they say? Because I'm worried you're going to fight over it if you're going to play with it. But then the father might sit down and play with the game. Well, they ask him, why are you allowed to play? Because the father, we're not worried about that. He's going to get into someone with a fight over this toy. The same thing. If a person is in a state of Chochma, removed from this world, where the entire world is seen to him as an instrument of Hashem, so then we're not concerned that being engaged in the physical world is somehow going to affect him. And the Rebbe says in the footnote, this is similar to Yosef HaTzadik, that Yosef HaTzadik was able to be involved in Egypt because he was so far removed from this world that the entire immorality of Egypt, he wasn't worried that it would affect him. Whereas the Avis and the Shvatim, they couldn't engage with the world. They had to remove themselves from the world. They had to be shepherds. Okay, this is on the Parsha. Then the next part of the Sikha is about Menachem Av. So I decided to stop over here and then go into the second half of this week's Parsha, which is Masei, bottom of page 300. He says, Masei, Duber Pam Bar Harchovoh B'dvar HaMasois HaNimnim B'Parshaseinu Mitzias Mitzrayim Ad Yardin Yerichoi Shehem Chuvonim L'chol HaInyonim Shetzrichim Lavar Al Am Yisrael Ad Bias Mashiach. Many places Chassidus asks about it. Why is it necessary to enumerate all the different places where they travel? Which is, we're going to have this. We have this in this week's Parsha on Wednesday's Chitas. We're going to read it tomorrow on Shabbos. Why is it necessary for the Torah to say they traveled from here to there, and they camped over here, and then they traveled from here to the other place, and enumerates 42 different stops? Why is that necessary? because like everything in Torah, it's an everlasting lesson. And the Rebbe says that this is, in a general way, these 42 journeys that the Yidden went through in the wilderness for over the 40 years, from when they left Mitzrayim till when they arrived in Eretz Yisrael, these are 42 stops that Am Yisrael in general, from when they became a people till when Mashiach comes, they go through, in a broad sense, in the macro 42 journeys. כפי שקוסה בספר קבלה כמים רב שם טוב שהידע עניין המסויס יודע באיזה מסה הוא עומד ואיזה אשר עליו לעבור כמה ואילו מסויס עד ביס המשיח. The Baal Shem Tov says a person that recognizes the spiritual idea of the journeys in the Midbar, he knows what they are, the inner meaning, the Kabbalistic meaning behind this is, he can recognize in his own life, where am I holding on those 42 journeys? What do I still yet have to do to accomplish to be able to reach Mashiach's times?
Like in the shopping mall, they first tell you you are here.
You know where you have to go. Klolis mahavim kolam asois talit shvalis. It's all about we are going up higher. We're going from Egypt. It's Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim we know are constraints and limitations from the word meitzar. And we're going to Eretz Yisrael, which is Eretz Toiva Rechava, a broad land. It's two extremes, from confinement to broadness, to openness, to comfort. That transition needs 42 stages and steps to go through. The famous question brought down in many places in Chassidus. The Rebbe talks about it. Many Amarim speak about it. Why does it say these are the journeys that the Yidden left Egypt? Leaving Egypt was one journey. They went from the city of Ramses, which was inside of Egypt, and they crossed the Egyptian border, and the next stop was Sukkot. Why does it say these, the 42 journeys that he's going to enumerate, that was the journeys of going out of Mitzrayim? Because they are all steps. They are all stages in going up. Huh?
The 42 were one trip.
One trip once.
So that's what it means. They went out of Egypt with 42.
You left Brazil once, then you stopped in Miami, and then you go to New York. You only left Brazil once, then you left Miami.
So he's saying, "Lefisha kol maso yitzia miMitzrayim shel oiseh shah el hamerchav shel oiseh shah." In other sikhs, the Rebbe explains this at greater length. When we talk about being confined and limited and being comfortable, there's all types of relative stages of confinement and relative stages of comfort. Someone could be in prison and you say he's confined. Then they throw the guy into solitary confinement, and when he's released, he says, Baruch Hashem, I got out of solitary confinement, and I'm now not in solitary anymore. Then the guy gets out of prison, but he still has to go to a halfway house. He's still confined to a certain degree. Or he's wearing an ankle bracelet. He's still confined to a certain degree. Or he can't leave the country because he still has a trial coming up. There's things that are considered confinement in comparison to a higher level of release and comfort, but they're considered comfort and release of confinement in comparison to what was earlier. So there's 42 goings out of confinement. There is the confinement of going out of the literal Egypt when they cross the border. That's maybe like going from solitary to gen pop, as they call it. Then there is going out from prison to I was 3 weeks for Aleph in Pensacola, and then they go out from the prison to halfway house, and then they go to ankle. These are 42 steps where every single step they are going out of a confinement of Mitzrayim, of confinements, constrictions, Mitzrayim, to a comfort, to a broadness. But these are all still temporary. The ultimate broadness is when Mashiach comes. Kayim hare mispar nikar shel dargas. Zu shel agabe abchusa menu nikras eretz toiva v'rechava. Nechshavas agabe anayos menu Mitzrayim. What's considered comfort and broadness and release in comparison to a lesser level, to a greater confinement, is still considered confinement in comparison to something higher. בבחינת לאין הרויך ממצרים על ארץ טובה רחבה, שלפי מצבו הנוכחי לפחס, שזו עלייה שלוי בהדרגה. There's a, wherever he's at, he is still going up higher, and he still has to aim for higher. And that's what a Yid is all about. Malochim kruyim oimdim. As great as Malochim are, we know they're called standing in one place. Even though Malochim are also rising, but they do not have this extreme that they are going from confinement to broadness. When they come down here in this world, kruyos mahalchim, they're called travelers. Ki hein musugalos leleches shaloi ba'adraga klal. B'masa echad belvad, lotzeis me Mitzrayim, Mitzarim v'gvulos el eretz tova rechava, aliyah migvula bligvul, they could go from a limited state to a completely unlimited state. We don't have to be satisfied with going out of one level of confinement. To keep on going. Knowing that this stage is still constriction. And the Mamar Chassidus always says Yerecha is from the word Reach, smell or scent. Scent and smell has to do with Mashiach. Lebias HaMashiach, the coming Mashiach, the Moich V'doin, it says Mashiach will smell, and that's how we will judge. It says in the Haftorah of Achon Shel Pesach, from Yeshaya and Navi's Nevuah, that Loi Lamara Einav Yishbait, Loi Mishma Oznav, he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, he will not judge by what he hears with his ears, he will judge by the sense of smell. So therefore, Yardin Yerecha, Yericha hints at Mashiach. So these 42 travels, journeys that we've been going on is to lead us to Ever Yardin Yerechai, B'mheru Amenum, Amen. To the coming of Mashiach, speedily, Amen.